welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Mowbray, and in each episode I will discuss the key topics that impact football coaching from the foundation and youth development phases. Thanks for listening, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, John. Welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast. Thank you so much for being one of our guests on this episode. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, it's definitely our honour. And where are you, John? Where are you in the States?
Oregon, so the northwest part of the States, north of California. Wrapping up our fall season here. It's starting to get cold, starting to see some snow on the mountains, and just finishing up. I coach 13-year-old boys at this point, 12 and 13-year-olds, so just kind of wrapping up what's been a very interesting couple of months stint here with coronavirus and all that.
I bet, yeah. Well, if it's okay, we'll come on to all that stuff in a little while about how things have gone and maybe how it's impacted on your coaching and stuff over there. But John, just to say, it's a real honour for me to have you on this episode. We spoke a little bit before we turned the recording on, but I started the podcast about 2 years ago, and one of the main reasons we started it, or I started it, was listening to what you were doing, the great work you were doing with your podcast and the other stuff that you had out there, and just trying to really take some of that stuff and feed it into maybe a slightly more niche audience over here in the UK around just grassroots foundation phase coaching. But it was off the back of listening to your episodes for probably well over a year. My wife's saying, just do it yourself, Scott. You go have a go yourself. You keep listening to John and the other ones, keep doing it. So really, it's a real privilege to have you on this one. And I'm looking forward to having a good chat around the stuff and really just sharing maybe the stuff that you've picked up over doing what you've done with the books and the blogs and the podcasts and things, and sharing some of those ideas. But for those people that maybe haven't come across yet or have, but maybe don't know exactly what it is you do, a bit of a background to what you've done previously and what your company do, Joe, if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in New York and was a multi-sport athlete as a young guy who graduated to soccer, to football. I played in the university over here. I played in a league that's now called the USL for a little while. I had a couple bad injuries but didn't want to leave the game. So I jumped into coaching. I coached at the, our high school level. I coached at NCAA Division I university for 4 years. And then kind of like you, I really fell in love with the youth side and the grassroots side. And so I've coached everyone from 5-year-olds to, 35-year-olds and everywhere in between. But right now I work with middle school age boys. And I kind of really like that. And so along that way, I got out of full-time coaching in 2011 and started Changing the Game project, which was sort of my passion project at that time. I wrote a book called Changing the Game for parents. I wanted to help parents help their kids in sport. And I saw many parents who loved their kids, but weren't necessarily being super helpful. And then I started getting a lot of speaking requests because of our blog. And I ended up doing a TED Talk. And as those speaking requests came in, I realized I should be talking to coaches too. I mean, I've done this for over 20 years. I know what it's like to be a coach. And so now Changing the Game project, we do parent education and we do a lot of coach education, local schools and clubs all the way up to national sport governing bodies. So I've worked with everyone, probably a dozen different sport governing bodies in the U.S. I've worked with Ireland rugby, Aussie rules football, around the world in many, many sports. But I'm a soccer coach. That's what I played. That's what I'm most familiar with. But I think when we're talking about supporting parents and coaches, really coaching, 10% of coaching is the technical, tactical knowledge of your sport, and 90% is where do we all meet in the middle and talk about how to motivate, inspire, communicate with athletes, things like that. Doesn't matter if you're a swim coach or soccer coach or lacrosse or basketball, right? We all can really learn from each other a ton. So that's what Changing the Game project does these days. And you mentioned we have a podcast called Way of Champions with my great friend Jerry Lynch. And we're 3.5 years into that podcast as well, which has been a pretty crazy journey.
We'll talk more about the podcast in a bit, but just what was the inspiration behind it? Because the thing that runs through everything you do seems to be about trying to make things better. And like you say, not necessarily about the X's and the O's and kind of coaching sessions, but more about the holistic kind of environment that coaching takes place in, regardless of the sport. What inspired that for you? Was there an incident that happened, or was there just an experience that you went through, or was it just the fact that actually you just think things could be better?
I mean, I think I was in an organizational, running an organization with about 1,500 kids in it, and I was getting burnt out from the politics and the misunderstandings and the bad communication or things like that. But I remember distinctly, watching my daughter, who was 6 at the time, playing a 6-year-old, soccer game, and the giant blob of players, and everyone's positive, and there's no referee, and kids kick it in the wrong goal, and everyone laughs. And right next door, there's the 10-year-old game, and all of a sudden, everyone's ultra competitive, and they're screaming at the 12-year-old referee, and they're screaming at the kids, and the screaming at every mistake. And it's just like, wow, where have we gone wrong? And so that was kind of my thing of like, can we help? And as what I learned was, we were losing 3/4 of kids to organized sports by the age of 12 and 13. And so many PE programs were being poorly run if kids got PE at all. And, we often talk about in the United States healthcare and stuff like that. But, what's really interesting, certainly like the UK has a healthcare system, and a lot of countries do, and we're one of the only ones that doesn't. But we're all those international healthcare systems are on a pathway to bankruptcy because of our human inactivity and rises in obesity and all that sort of stuff. And so, sport is this great way to keep people moving, and yet for so many kids, it's a terrible experience. Because the coaches aren't trained, or because their values are misaligned with what the kids want. And I was like, man, I'd love to be able to maybe chip away at that and make a difference here. And I like to write, and I like to research. And so, yeah, here we are, 8 years later, and it's still going strong. So it tells me that this is information that people are looking for sure.
No doubt. Well, I guess that's the point of it, isn't it? Hopefully it's getting the buy-in, I guess, from the audiences that you're trying to target, especially around the adults and the coaches, which we're interested to know kind of how successful you've been over there in the States at doing that. Because in the UK, I think we have a similar problem where there's lots of best intentions from those people that are involved, particularly as volunteers in the grassroots space, but best intentions isn't always enough, because for whatever reason, that can sometimes not be the best recipe to create the best environment for the players. How do you find it over there with regards to getting the message out to those people that need to hear it? Are people open ear to this, and is it a kind of an easy win because of you and your reputation and obviously help the work you've done, or is it still a struggle to get the right people to listen?
No, it's definitely a struggle. And, you see change on the family level or a team level or a club level, but we have not seen systemic change in sport here. Because there's so many other factors that influence it. Right now, sport in the US, youth sport, is a $20 billion a year industry. So you have a lot of people with their hand in the till making money off sport and wanting to preserve the status quo. And the problem that you're 10 or 12 or 16 or 18, whatever your roster is, of people to be on the same pathway, but especially in grassroots and foundation level sport, right? That's not the case. You might have, 2 kids who are really competitive and, 5 or 6 who are there because their friends are there and this is new to them. They're just learning, but there's some potential. And then, you might have 2 or 3 that, can barely like walk and, chew gum at the same time. And if all of a sudden you get a dad or mom coaching who's all about, winning and only playing the good kids, and this is serious, and we're going to stand in lines and we're going to learn and we're not going to scrimmage, well, a lot of those kids aren't going to come back. And so, I think the U.S. is far more disjointed. We don't have national sport governing, a ministry of sport, if you will. And so the standards are left up to all these different entities of what does good coaching look like. And doing coach education and things like that. And so it's all over the board, which is really sad and makes some experiences fantastic. And sometimes they're just awful.
And with parents then, John, what would you say are the key messages you try to get to parents, and how do you get their message out to them?
Well, I mean, number one, just love your kid unconditionally, right? Like this was the theme of my TED talk, that your love for your child can't be based upon how they did in their game. And then number two, like see this journey and begin at the end. You know, like when you think about good practice design, right? You usually start in good practice design with, well, what do we want to play like on the weekend, or in our practice today? What's the game we're building toward? And then what are the activities we're going to do to build toward that final thing? Well, I think parenting your kid in sport as well is start at the end. What are we building toward? And no one's like, I want a kid who's injured and disrespectful and doesn't know how to work well with others and has been bullied or abused at the end of all this. So if I look at what I want to end with, then how do I plug the pieces in so that they work towards that end? And I think what people get stuck in, many parents get stuck in, is they look at that slice right in front of me right now, instead of seeing the entire journey. And so especially during COVID and things like that, everything's up in the air. And if you go into panic mode because, oh my God, my kid hasn't gotten in front of a college scout in 6 months, instead of thinking about how do we get better? How do we use this time? Maybe we have some margin in our life to explore something else that you've always wanted to do. Maybe this is a great time to heal from some long-term injuries. And so really the big thing is see the journey and not just what's in front of you.
And how do you get that message out, John? Obviously, you've got the Change in the Game project and the resources that are on there. How do you get parents to engage with it in a way that actually, they actually pick up and makes a difference to how they maybe treat their children and how they go through the whole experience of being part of that journey with them?
Well, it's hard sometimes because people, I've never ever once gotten on an airplane when someone asks me what I do, and I say, I work with schools and youth sports organizations doing parent and coach education to make the experience better. No one's ever said to me, "Oh, John, that's a stupid idea." Everyone who has kids involved in sport, they're like, "Oh man, where were you 10 years ago when I needed you?" Or they're like, "Oh, you have to come to our school. It's nuts." But it's always all the other parents, right? So when people don't see themselves in the things, I'm sure as well, it's the lack of information is not the problem. There's so much to change things and push back against the status quo, and that can be a really hard thing when you're afraid, man, if I push back, my kid might lose his spot on the team, or we might get kicked out of this club, or what if we are falling behind? What if my kid does miss out? And so it's a lot to ask parents to sort of lead this charge. And then what happens is you get these awful situations in USA Gymnastics or things like that, where the parents are so browbeaten that they don't say anything, and yet, physical and emotional abuse is going on. And so we really need organizations and we need great coaches to step up and say, this is about the kids. This is about who's in front of me. It's about making that experience great for them, and then building trust with parents that this is going to be hard. This is going to be demanding, but I'm in it for your kid. I love your kid, and my doors are always open. We can communicate when you don't understand what's happening. That's what I think a great foundation phase coach-parent relationship looks like. It can't be like, don't call me, don't email me, don't even make eye contact with me. That's nuts.
And what about coaches in themselves? Do you have a different approach to trying to target coaches and the message you want to put out there, or is it the same message in the same way? Or do you find actually with coaches, you've got to have a different angle to kind of get them on board with some of this stuff?
Coaches are an interesting breed, and I lot myself into the same category. In that, you run the gamut. So you'll have some who are just all in about, what's new, what do you got there? And what's really interesting is those are amongst the best coaches. I'm sure you've crossed paths in your world and on your podcast and stuff with incredible coaches, and they're the most curious. They're the ones who are like always like, what do you got? What can I learn from you? It's really the ones who aren't that good that have stopped learning, that think they know it all, that aren't open to those new things. And those are the ones who sit in the front of my talk with their arms crossed and they're like, this is stupid. Why am I even here? So what I'm always asking coaches is like, look, like the point of this talk, the point of listening to this podcast is not that you throw out everything and start again, right? The point is, can you find 5%? Can you find 10% that maybe you can do better, right? What's something that you can tweak? And maybe it's in your session design. Maybe it's in the way that you communicate with parents. Maybe it's how you cede control and ownership of the experience to your athletes. If you do that, like, man, what's your 5-10%? And then if that works, then add something else back in. But if you're going to show up here and think, I got all of this, I mean, it's amazing in the US, right? So like I've been lucky enough to know coaches who work at Manchester United, who work in Liverpool, who work at La Masia. And, those coaches every week are in coaching meetings of this is what the sessions look like. And this is how we're going to go about this. And this is how we're going to do stuff, right? So you have these highly qualified coaches in the best clubs in the world who are highly organized and planned about what they're going to do, go out to, any town, USA, and try to tell a coach, this is a session you should run. They're like, yeah, step back, man. Like no one tells me what to do. Right. And you're like, you got to be kidding me. Like these people who are far more qualified than you are being told what to do, and you think you're just going to run with this all by yourself. That's crazy.
Funny you say that, John, because even at the weekends over here, when we go and see what we call it academy coaches, so like the professional clubs and doing their age groups and maybe doing tournaments and sessions, and you watch the coaches' behavior there, they're very calm, they're very collected. There's no real pressure on the kids, it feels like, or the players, and it's quite relaxed. And you think, well, actually, this is their careers and their jobs, really. These guys are doing it. And yet you go and watch some of the parent volunteer coaches that are doing maybe an under-9s, just a recreational Sunday league game that doesn't really mean anything apart from just, what it's supposed to be for the players. And the intensity and the stress is just through the roof. And I kind of think maybe we've got it wrong there, because not that it should be the other way around, but certainly if the professionals aren't feeling stress and pressure around results and performance, and a conscious of the environment, I think it's okay that maybe we do as well as the under-9s coaches of the weekend. Do you know what I mean by that? It feels like we over worry about.
Oh, I totally do, and it's because those professional clubs, they're not stealing the reps from the kids, right? And they know that these kids have to make these decisions and have to go through it. And it's not to say that there's not pressure on those kids, because there certainly is, but it's not the sideline chirping and the problem solving being done from the sideline. Your story, and I know since you're an Arsenal fan, one of my very, very best friends is a coach in Major League Soccer right now, but he cut his teeth in youth coaching, working over in London for, at the time it was Wimbledon was the club. And, he's coaching like the young kids, and they're playing at Arsenal. And, he's like, Arsenal plays this like, 9-year-olds, 8-year-olds, 6-pass, great combination, pings the ball through. The kid from Arsenal's right in front of me. He's probably a step off sides. And they play on, and I'm sitting there screaming like, that's offsides, that's offsides. And he goes, I didn't know what I was thinking, and just is like my habit, like, offsides, he's offsides, instead of admiring the beauty of this play. And he says, all of a sudden I felt a hand on my shoulder, and I turn around, and it's Liam Brady. And Liam Brady's like, settle down and let the kids play. And he was like, I'm such an idiot,
But it's understandable, because it's emotional and you kind of get involved in it. So I do understand it, but I do think that reality check's quite important, and we all need a Liam Brady on our shoulders telling us to calm down. I think sometimes that's the answer there straight away. I listened to your TED Talk. Was it back in 2014 you did it? Yeah, it's fantastic, and I'd recommend everyone to watch it. And I'll put a link in the show notes, that's okay with you, to this episode, because it should be watched. And I love the fact I love watching your play quote that you put in there, which is brilliant. Not to spoil the end there, but I just wondered, obviously that's 6 years ago now. Has anything changed with regards to your views on things? I mean, it's quite a passionate TED Talk you give there, and it comes from the heart, and it resonates really well when you watch it, and some of the, not just the facts, but the way you put it across. But for you, has anything changed either with your own personal thoughts around that, or is it just a case of, what I said back then stays now and we're still on this mission?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the book Changing the Game that I wrote around that time as well. I'm actually quite proud that I think a lot of it has stood the test of time. We know some more stuff. There's more research now around things like injuries that aren't in the book, or maybe I would have talked about then. But I think a lot of these things that I was referring to at that time are very, very timeless. And so I'm very proud of that. Like, I don't think anyone can, read my book right now and go, none of this makes sense anymore. Like, it's all there. And if we think about, like, what are the timeless things in sport? What's the same thing about sport that made it great when you were growing up and I was growing up, to kids today, to my own children? And I think, number one, it's got to be fun. So we have to understand what fun is, or they won't come back. Number two, kids want great positive coaches and positive team dynamics. And number three, kids have parents. Those things don't change. And so what I talked about back then was, how do we make this fun based upon what kids define as fun, which isn't fooling around and not paying attention. It's a challenging environment. It's positive coaching. It's great team dynamics. It's learning new things. That's what makes it fun. And then how do we teach coaches that, so that we are aligned with what our children need in this moment? And especially now, and I can't speak to how sport looks in every different country, and certainly in the US in every different state, but I'll speak specifically to the kids that I'm coaching right now. None of them are going to school, right? They're all doing school at home. So all their 6-7 hours of social interaction per day are gone. So oftentimes their only social interaction with other kids when they come together for training, and they're sitting there, they got to wear a mask to training. They train with a mask on, right? They do all this stuff. We don't have out of town games. We set up a local 7-a-side league for kids to play. We mix the ages. It's been going great. But some nights I get to practice and I want to accomplish a lot of stuff, right? And then I look at the kids and, a couple times in a row, they're not, and this might be more so like the B team than the A team kids who are a little more serious about it. But should I keep banging my head against the wall to, teach pressure and cover? Or can I just say, wow, these kids get 2 days a week to hang out with their buddies and they'd love to just roll a ball out and get a match going. How can I serve them best in this moment is probably if I do that. And so can I shorten my teaching, or just teach less and make sure it's always around moving and playing and enjoyment and having fun and that kind of stuff? Because that's what they need from me. Because none of them are turning pro, right? They're not turning pro. So the idea that, if we're not doing what the 12-year-olds at Arsenal are doing right now, these kids are falling behind. They're already years behind and they're never catching up. So how about I make sure that they love this sport and they say, God, 2020, that year sucked. Thank God for soccer. That was the only thing that kept me sane. I feel like that's my job right now.
I saw a good question on Twitter, actually. Someone pinged it out saying, it was a Johan Cruyff quote saying, if it's not fun, it doesn't make sense. And you can't argue with that. But it get me thinking, because actually what's fun to one player or kid might be different to another player or child. So the fun thing comes up a lot, but I guess as coaches, it's important for us to know not what we think is fun, but what our players individually and collectively think is fun. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also, understand what you signed up for, right? Because that determines fun. What I can promise isn't fun is standing in lines. I just gotten back from the Women's World Cup in France, and thinking about the U.S. winning the World Cup and all the little girls going, I want to be Alex Morgan, I want to be Megan Rapinoe, I want to be this, right? And teach all this stuff, and we're going to learn 52 moves, and we're going to learn all this. And at the end of practice, are we going to play a game? No, we're not going to play yet because we haven't learned enough yet. It's so important that as a coach, you understand why those kids are there. Now, I have two teams, right? And they have different levels of expectations based upon what they signed up for and where they want to meet. The A team, well, then guess what? You should be showing an A team level of commitment and extra stuff. You can't do what the B team guys do and then wonder, even within your group, you have sort of your team culture and what you signed up for. But then within that group, you're going to have different levels. And I'm always like, well, how can I inspire someone to want a little more out of this game? To love a little more, to practice a little more. I feel like that's my job. And yet, here's the bare minimum requirement: show up to training twice a week, play the games on the weekend. And if that's the only time you pick up a ball, I have to be okay with that too. Just recognize that if someone comes along and takes your spot because they do twice as much as you, I think as coaches, right, that's where you have to just be honest with people.
Yeah.
Right? Just be honest with them and be like, hey, I'm here to help you get where you want to go. And if someone's willing to invest more than you are, then you have to be okay with that, right? But you don't have a God-given right to your spot in this group for the next 7 years based on where you are today, right? You got to keep up and watch as people grow and change. And I always insist on coaching the entire age group for my organization because I want to coach those kids on the second team. I want to see those kids on the bubble. I want to see the kid who just grew 6 inches and is he ready to make that jump versus those kids practicing with a different coach on a different night. And I never see them. And then all of a sudden there becomes this huge gap between the two teams.
You mentioned your book, John, and your book's fantastic. I think it should be compulsory reading for anyone who wants to get involved in any kind of coaching or just parents that have got kids in sports. It genuinely is an excellent book and one we recommend to all our coaches within our club. I wondered if you were going to do an update to it, would there be anything you would change? I mean, you said it's to the test of time, which I think it definitely has from when you wrote it back then, which I guess in some ways is a little bit worrying because you think, well, I hope things have improved, but I think it still resonates very well. But if you had to add or change anything to that, is there anything you would do for a 2020 version, or is it still spot on as it is?
I think some of the research that's changed, since I wrote the book Changing the Game was, just around this idea of long-term athlete development and maybe some more nuance into what that would look like. There's definitely more research out there and compiled and distilled into what makes people really good at something. Dr. Mark Williams has a brand new book out. It's out in the UK. It's called The Best. It's released here in the US in December 1, but I got to read it and I've had Mark on the podcast and I'm about to have him on again. And that book gives some nuance to, early specialization and early engagement. So I think when we talk about things like sports specialization, it's hard in a soundbite to give it its true discussion that it needs of like, well, what does this look like and what's good and what's not good. But I think overall, like a lot of it's good. And then my book for coaches is called Every Moment Matters, and that just came out. So thankfully, I think that's standing the test of time 6 months later or 9 months later still.
I'm sure it is. Every moment matters. Well, you mentioned your podcast there, John, and obviously I've listened to pretty much all the episodes. I wonder from your experience of doing the podcast, what you've got out of it. And has there been any surprises or any things that's kind of people you spoke to that have influenced maybe you're thinking in a different direction?
Sometimes it's just been the best practice ever. And sometimes it's blown up spectacularly in my face. And it was a terrible practice. And, but that's the journey, right? And then I say to the kids, hey, practice tonight, not so good. That's on me. Wanted to try something new, but I'm learning just like you're learning. And when an adult tells kids that it's okay to mess up and we're all learning together, they're more likely to be like, yeah, coach is on the same journey as me versus practice was bad. It worked for Steve Kerr. I'm not sure why it doesn't work for you. It must be you guys who suck, right? And that's not really going to be super helpful to motivate your kids to do better.
It's funny that the power of kind of self-reflection and looking at your contribution to the situation first is a good thing, and sharing that journey with the players so they understand that you're learning together is so important, right? Because I think then you get the trust, don't you? And if you've got the trust and you can make mistakes, then that's part of the journey, and the players feel they can do that as well.
Completely. And then other nights when it goes well, you throw the credit to them. I mean, last night I was coaching and it was fantastic. and I had to end it because I had another session. And I said, guys, some nights you're doing so well that I don't want to end practice. And tonight was one of those nights. Like, that was fantastic to watch. I didn't want this to end. I had to kept going if there wasn't 16 people waiting to get on the field. And so, that's great. And other nights it's like, hey guys, it wasn't our night. What wasn't working tonight? Was it the focus? Was it, what did you like about the session? What did you not like about the session? What could have made that better? Do we need a bigger space? And it's been really interesting, especially during COVID, especially during the summer where our kids had to practice with a mask on. The amount of feedback that I was seeking from the kids of like, how is this, or is it, are we in play for too long? Do you need more water? Do you need a longer break? Like, getting that constant feedback from the kids was wonderful. And it really gives them ownership of it when they're like, no, let's play. This is good. Right. And I'm like, oh, don't complain. You guys wanted to play. Right. But I'm not the one running around with a mask on and it's 90 degrees outside.
Yeah. Well, on that then, a bit about, if you don't mind, just your own coaching. I think we could probably guess what your philosophy kind of is towards the sessions that you run and you deliver. But if I was going to be one of your players on one of your coaching sessions, what could I expect to see? How would it look in practice?
Well, my group has 3 core values, right, that they came up with. And these are the things we talk about every day, right? So number 1 is fun and enjoyment, right? That's what it has to be. If it's not, then we're doing something wrong. Number 2 is competitiveness and accountability, right? So and that's usually not a big problem with 12-year-old boys versus, have to ramp it up. And then number 3 is we called it family, right? That we support each other, and we're 12-year-old and 13-year-old boys, whatever crosses their mind comes right out their mouth, right? So if you give the ball away, you're going to hear it from 7 different kids. Whereas, I've done stints with girls the same age, and, you give the ball away and they're more likely to be like, oh, Jenny, good try. It's okay. And then turn to their friend and be like, Jenny sucks. Right. So it's like everything is publicly positive and privately negative. Whereas the boys, it just all comes out but then they're over it at the end. And so I have to work very hard to keep it positive around like, hey, he made a mistake and you've made some mistakes, and let's, how do you think he feels in this moment if you're yelling at him every time he gets the ball because he's not playing the pass that you think he should pass or whatever, or play. So, but yeah, I mean, I think if you came to my sessions, we play a lot, right? We start with rondos, we mix in movement and core stability and force activities within that. We do position play games, and then we always finish with a big game, whether it's 7-a-side or 9-a-side, or I have lots of kids from other teams that'll come and do extra sessions with my team. So a lot of times I'll have 22, 24 kids and we'll play 11-a-side across a half field. Right. And it's like, hey, if you can't play 11v11 in, 60 meters by 70 meters, because, usually 11v11 is in a lot smaller space than that at the pro level. So when people are like, we need a whole field, they're like, no, you don't. You can play 11-a-side cross field pretty easily here. And then the game's moving fast and it's quick and there's lots of touches and lots of interactions. But yeah, everything for me is games based. I only get them for 3 hours a week. And so if you're struggling with technique X, Y, and Z, my expectation for you is that you go home and you work on that. And that's your time to make it better by yourself, because when we come together, we do team things. And everything that you're being asked to do technically is going to be deployed in an environment. So you have decisions and defenders and direction and all these things so that this is actually transfers to the match. That's what, I believe in, ecological dynamics. I believe in, representative design, that if your practice doesn't look like the game, it's not going to transfer. And I think the evidence is pretty compelling on that.
Well, it's funny because I think when the less time you have with the players, the more it makes you focus on the stuff that's going to have the biggest impact, right? And that's where that transference and And making it game based and relative to the matches has more impact, doesn't it? And like
100%. And this is, I think, the problem that when we watch Sky Sports and we see, there's Man City going through, some basic movements or some, unopposed passing. It's like, yeah, that's Monday and they just played on Sunday, right? And so that's their recovery session. The one day a week when the cameras are there. That's not what they're doing every day. Plus, guess what? They're there 20 hours a week. You have 3, right? So what do you do? You got to use your time the most effective way possible. And that is, you quoted Cruyff before, right? He's like, anyone can juggle. You can go work in the circus, right? Like, it doesn't matter. You have to deploy things in their environment and give, in the sport of soccer, you have to give kids tons of reps of scanning and making choices and executing those choices and then assessing them and doing it again and again and again and again. And that happens in rondos and that happens in little games. That doesn't happen with me and my buddy passing a ball back and forth.
Well, and on that one then, I wonder, do you have a favourite session? Have you got like a go-to session or kind of game that you like to play that you might turn to quite regularly? Or if you had to jump in for a coach last minute and had to put something on, is there a go-to game or practice that you like?
I love little transitional games to goal. I love games like that because the kids have fun because they're going to goal. They get their running in, they get their, they get their fitness, they get lots of decisions. So I have lots of ones that I'll play, let's say, penalty box extended and 3v2 going one way and then 2v1 coming back the other way. 3v2, 4v3 coming back the other way. So lots of like quick, like 30 to 40 second reps where the 3v2 gets it and then the last guy to touch the ball drops back on defense. The 2 defenders get a ball from their keeper and attack 2v1, right? And so there's shots, there's lots of numbers up situations, and it's a quick, fast moving game. Kids work hard, they come off, they get a quick rest, and they're jumping back on. Those are my favorite, like, type of, hey, let's jump in and do this, because you've got all the elements that you've got. I mean, I think the worst thing you can do is step in to cover a coach and do shadow play, like
yeah, you can't go wrong, can you, with kind of overloads that are directional that end up with goals. I mean, all the players love doing those kind of things, don't they? So there's loads
and it's a competition, right? And so you've made it a competition. You've got all these elements, they've got these decisions. You can teach a lot of things within that. And and it's fun and it moves fast, and then do that, and then okay, let's play a 9-a-side here at the end, and boom boom boom. I mean, I think the best thing that you can ever hear as a coach is, are we done already? Like when you're 90 minutes just flew by and kids are like, wait, are we done? I'm like, we're actually 5 minutes over. Like, God, like to me that's like, sweet, that one worked.
Show that they love the session.
Yeah.
Well, look, I don't know if this is going to be an easy question for you or a hard question, given what you've been doing over the last 6, 7, 8 years. But we ask everyone this that comes on, and it's, if you could change just one thing about the world of football or coaching, what might that be?
I think I can speak best to North America, right? So I don't know that this will be as relevant to your UK audience or something like that. But for me, it would be patience. Just add some patience. We're in such a hurry to make really young kids do more, younger. It's a scary thing when you're talking about your technical and tactical periodization for kids who sleep with teddy bears still. That to me is crazy. And what we know from physiological development, especially with boys, right, that a 12-year-old boy could have the body of a 10-year-old or a 15-year-old. So the idea that we're making talent identifications decisions for 7-year-olds, 8-year-olds, we're so bad at it. And so I wish, and what happens around the world is we have this self-fulfilling prophecy of, well, if I don't get into the academy at 8, it's really hard to get in later. And so how many kids are we missing out on? And then how many of those kids that we pick early, when we look at relative age and the fact that, well, they're all just born really close to the calendar cutoff. We're just good at selecting birthdays, not, who's going to be best in the long term. And so I wish some countries like Belgium's doing a great job of this. And this is why they're producing better players, is they let, physically less mature kids play down in age, and, playing half year selection teams, and just really focusing on what the kids at this specific age need. And so for me, just be patient, just develop all your kids, as many kids as possible, and get them great coaching, and just be patient, because that kid at 9 who's not showing much might really all of a sudden blossom when he or she grows. And it would be a real shame if they were now playing basketball because you got rid of them.
Well, I look forward to the episode you're going to do. Is it Dr. Mark Williams you said about doing the early specialization and things like that?
Yeah, that's coming up.
That would be a fascinating listen.
Yeah, that's coming up here in I'm recording him in November, like right around December 1st release, which is when his book comes out in the US, but you can already get his book in the UK. It's called The Best, and it's really, really good.
Okay, well, I'll try and put that in the show notes and link to that as well. But I look forward to that episode. John, I know I'm pushing up with your time, so just really my final question to you would be, you've done such a cracking job. I love the podcast. The book's excellent, the changing the game book. The website's fantastic. What's your plans? You're doing everything, coaching as well. What's your plans, and I guess your hopes maybe for the next maybe 2, 3, 4 years?
I mean, my hope would be that I could become a full-time fly fisherman, but that's not going to happen. I don't know. I mean, I really feel like it's so hard to predict what the next 6 months or year is going to even look like right now, in the world of sport, in the world in general. And so I've tried not to get too caught up in that. I love the podcast. We want to keep that going. I think one thing that'll come out of the pandemic is that people have gotten much more comfortable learning and being mentored online. And so working a lot in that area to really work closer with coaches on a more one-on-one basis or small group basis. I want to keep doing that. I have another book in me here soon that Jerry and I are going to write together. And so really just kind of, continuing doing what we're doing. But I mean, for me, one of the most important things is I love coaching. I mean, it's why I'm here. And I really feel like I don't want to give up the coaching piece, even though sometimes it's hard, because, that makes you real to the audience you're talking about, right? When you're talking about like, I just kind of came from a practice of, 13-year-old girls. Anyone know what that's like? And I was like, oh my God, so it's being a practitioner is really, really important, and not just being academic about it or whatever. And so coaching is still the best part of my week.
Yeah, well, that's how it should be, right? And John, the final question then, just really, do you think it's getting better? I mean, is the coaching environment for our young players getting more positive?
Definitely. I mean, I think you can see that with player development. I think in the UK, they've made great strides. I think in the US, we're moving in that direction for sure. Now, there's always going to be outliers where they're just terrible situations. But I think for the most part, I think a lot of people are really trying to do it right. And as our governing bodies get smarter, like how can we support them better? Like one of the things that I've said now that so much coach education is online is why don't we in the United States let every current high school age player do the online grassroots coaching stuff for free? Let's teach them to coach while they're still playing. And then, you know what? Maybe they'll leave and they'll go and do their life, and then they'll have kids, and then they'll be asked by their local place to coach. And they're like, you know what? I took some good coaching courses back then. They really made sense. Let me look into what's next. Right. And that's the kind of thing I think the sports that do that can really grow their sports. So I'm very optimistic. I think we have a lot of tools at our disposal to teach. And I think if we really just start teaching people that first and foremost, coaching is about relationships and coaching is about people, we're in a good spot.
On the right track. Yeah, brilliant. John, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your time. I know how busy you are, but it's been a wonderful opportunity to have a chat with you, and I love all the work you're doing. Just for people that might want to reach out to you or see some of your stuff, what's the best way for them to come across the podcast, the blogs, the website, the books, or maybe even get in contact with you, if that would be okay?
Oh, yeah, sure. Changingthegameproject.com is the mothership of the website. You can find Every Moment Matters and Changing the Game, my two main books, on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Book Depository is a great one, free international shipping. Yeah, and that's where we have all our online courses and stuff. I'm on Twitter at CTG Project HQ. And then if someone wants to reach out my direct email is just John, JOHN, at changingthegameproject.com, and go ahead. I'll get back to you as quickly as I can.
Well, I can vouch for that, John, because you were kind enough to respond back to me when I reached out to you. Yeah, that shows you how accessible you are and how keen you are to to support other people in different environments, to kind of spread the word and hopefully help other coaches out there. Thank you so much. I hope things stay safe and well for you out in Oregon, and the coaching gets back to some even more normality than it currently is. And I look forward to listening to more of your episodes on the podcast and staying in contact with what you're doing. Please keep up the great work, John, because it's been an inspiration to me personally, and I know you have an impact on other people over here in the coaching world. So thank you so much. Please keep up the great work, and thanks so much for your time today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you having me on.